Because that's really where our hope lies, isn't it? The hope is not in ourselves. The hope is not that we're going to get it right, or we're going to do things right. The hope is in God, who is in control of everything. And we don't have to be. Go and let God have His way. I love that part. Your burdens will vanish, your night will turn to day. How many here maybe feel like they've been living in a prolonged night? Sometimes we have times in our life that just seem really dark, and like it's always night, and the sun will never come up. You know, that is the neat thing about the Jewish day. It goes how God created the earth, and it went from evening to morning, right? That's how the day goes. The reason is because you go from night to day. Think about it. How do we do our days? We start what? In the morning, and how do we end? At night. So we go from light to darkness. But I want you to think about that. Reframe that in your mind. If we were to follow the way the Jewish people do, we go from darkness to light. As Christians, isn't that how we're supposed to live our life? From darkness into the light of God, into the light of Christ, that shines light into those times where maybe we feel hopeless. Or as we looked at last week, the despair. Well, this week, my third week in the class, we looked at a little bit back with despair. We also looked at forgiveness and hope. I find it interesting because this was not a Christian workshop, per se. It was for people, for companies, you name it. This appreciation inquiry class. And they call it forgiveness, but I thought it was interesting. The gals running it said, well, Penny, you would probably call it showing grace. I thought, oh, that is so true. The world's view of forgiveness is so different than God's view of forgiveness. It's real easy to say, oh, I forgive you, but not really mean it, right? And we look at what's the saying that's always been given, forgive and forget. No, God forgives. But we don't forget. And a lot of people have trouble forgiving because they feel like, well, I was hurt so deeply, if I forget, then that means it never happened. And that's not true. That's not true at all. Grace is giving yourself the opportunity to sit in whatever wronged you, whatever hurt you so deeply, but to not let it hold you prisoner. It does not excuse what the other person did, and you may have absolutely no control over that whatsoever. But as Christians, we have the grace to let ourselves sit there for the time, and then to be able to release ourselves from that horrible incident. I was thinking about a lot of things lately. I've had so many people come up to me who've been dealing with past memories, sexual abuse when they were little kids, things that have happened so tragic that they've really struggled with because they're like, how can I forgive that person? You know, it happened a long time ago, but if I forgive them, does that mean then that what they did didn't happen or doesn't count? And it's like, no, it definitely counted. It definitely happened. It scarred you. But forgiving them just frees you. Because when you hold on to that pain, when you hold on to something that you had no control over, it eats at you. And it causes a hole that just cannot be fixed unless you go to the healer. Unless you go to God and ask Him to fix that hole. where this went, it went even way deeper than that. I had one ask, so I know the person, and I know that right before he died, he accepted Christ. Which, as Christians, yes, we want to be happy that he accepted Christ. Because we know that when you do, our sins are forgiven and we get to go to heaven. But then she said, I don't know what to do with that. Because the only way she had been able to reconcile to herself her whole life was, he's finally going to get what's coming to him. And now, he accepted Christ. So now, knowing that we're not going to get what comes to us, what do we do with that? You know, it's really easy to come to church and to sit in the pews and to think, yay, God, you know, and yes, I'm so glad I'm forgiven, and yes, I'm glad he doesn't remember the pencil I stole in the 2nd grade, and yes, I'm glad he doesn't remember what I just said last week to somebody, and yes, I'm glad he's forgiven me for all those things that I've done. But we categorize sin, don't we? I stole a pencil, or I said something really horrible, but I said I was sorry. But this person killed somebody, or this person abused, or this person. We categorize, don't we, the sins? And that is what is so hard, I think, in God's world. Because sin is sin. It doesn't matter if you stole a pencil or if you killed someone. It's still sin. Even though we want to categorize it, it's still the same. And all of us fall short of the glory of God because of that sin. When I was talking to her, I said, I know this is probably not going to give you the immediate comfort that you want. And while I don't have all the answers, I said the reality is that if God was to not forgive him on his deathbed when he asked for forgiveness, then that means everything that I've ever done, God wouldn't forgive either. And we chatted a little more. And I said, really right now what it's about is allowing yourself the grace to come out on the other side of that incident that happened, that you had no control over at all. I had another gal, like I said, this has just been interesting. The last 2 months, God has just been bringing people from all over, in church, out of church, that has dealt with this. I had a lady that we were just working a stand together, and all of a sudden she started talking, and she brought up that when she was a sophomore, she'd been gang raped. 4 or 6 people. And I asked her, I just kind of smiled, and I said, so how many years of therapy did that take? She said, a lot. She's about the same age as me. There are things that we have no control over that happen to us. There are things that our bodies and our minds are not supposed to even process. So how do we deal with that? How do we come on the other side and not just forgive that person, but forgive ourselves? So I was talking to another friend last night. Same thing happened to her. And she said what people don't talk about is the self-forgiveness of guilt. Even if they were a little kid. What could I have done? What did I do that caused me to deserve this? Did I have a sign on my head? Did I do something? That's why I was singled out. She said that it's a guilt that you can't even describe. And she said it's a guilt that people live with their whole life. If they don't come to that point where they can bring that guilt before God and ask for forgiveness of release. Wow, that's powerful. There's so many aspects to things in life that we don't look at. With this appreciation inquiry, a lot of it is about reframing. Reframing how we see a situation. Reframing how we see a person. one of the things they brought up, which I thought was really interesting, was if there's something or someone we don't like, how do we reframe that? How do we deal with them? And I laughed and I said, that's an interesting question that you should bring up. Because back, I think I've talked about this before, about 15 years ago, God had opened up a healing ministry through me. And one of the things after I'd been doing this, he did, kind of like Solomon, he came to me and he said I could have a gift. And I could have any gift I wanted, to think about it. And I really didn't have to think about it because I had been mulling over this for quite some time. And I said, let me see people the way you see them, because I don't like them the way I see them. Let me see them through your eyes. And wow, when he gave me that gift, he broke me. Because I no longer saw that person who was the abuser. All of a sudden, I saw the abuse that they received when they were little from their father, and the abuse that their father had, and the abuse going back generations. And all of a sudden, it took the focus off of that person and the act they did, and I saw the brokenness behind what caused it. Did that excuse what they did? No. But it softened my heart. And it taught me a grace that I could never even do on my own. That was fun to be able to share that with a bunch of people who, some were believers and some were not. And they were like, wow, that's really profound. It was reframing things in a different way. How do I now see that person? So now if I see them not through my eyes but through God's eyes, how can I give them grace and how can I forgive them? I was talking with our regional representative for the DOC yesterday. He called up. And he was kind of excited I was doing this. And he says, we do this reframing in churches. You go into a church and people are upset because they remember what it used to be like. They loved the years in the 1950s when the church was full and there was all these activities. See, I'm already seeing smiles on people's faces. You're already going there, aren't you? You're thinking of those times, and they're looking around now, and they're seeing the declining members, and they're seeing the empty pews, and they're feeling the despair now of COVID and lost loved ones. And he said, we come in and we've been reframing it in a different way. Not, well, get over it, we're past it. No, what was it about that time that just put a smile on your face that you liked? Was it just because we had more people in church? No, I don't think so. Maybe it was who was in church at that time. Maybe it was different programs that we were doing, or maybe it was because there was kids, or maybe it was because it was just the feeling that you got when you walked in the door, or it was the people that you couldn't wait to see to reconnect with. Whatever it was about that time, I want you to just kind of focus on that. And then say, how do we bring that back? Maybe we don't bring back the 100 people right away. But how do we bring back the feelings of what got us so excited back in that era? How do we bring back some of those programs? And I'm seeing it already here. I mean, we've had so much life, even in the midst of COVID, even in the midst of maybe it looks like we've had sparse attendance in church. The ministry of this church has been booming. The excitement has been brewing. People have been thinking about, I've always wanted to do. That's great. That's awesome. So how do we reframe that? How do we use that and go forward to continue to connect with people? Because that's really where our hope lies, isn't it? The hope is not in ourselves. The hope is not that we're going to get it right or we're going to do things right. The hope is in God, who is in control of everything. And we don't have to be. By show of hands, how many here are control freaks? As I say, honest, most people will raise their hands, right? So, how's that been for you the last 2 years? It's been really frustrating, hasn't it? Because so much has happened to us and we have absolutely no control over. That's another thing for forgiveness. To know that that's the way you're wired. You're not defaulty. There's not something wrong with you. God didn't make you and afterward go, oops, I goofed on that one. I got a control issue. No, each one of us is hardwired with our strengths and our weaknesses and our gifts. And for some of us, we're impatient. For some of us, we're stubborn. For some of us, we're strong-willed. For some of us, we're control freaks. How do you use that as a strength and not as a negative? Allowing yourself grace to control that which you can control. To do something about that which you can. And to take a big, deep breath and be okay with the things you don't have control over. Because you know that your hope lies in the one who does. I have some scriptures here I wanted to read, besides the one from Peter, and I'm thinking that was 2 Peter, must have been a typo. But from Hebrews 1:1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Is that not the epitome of hope? Right? It's the stuff we can't see. We have to have faith. And our faith is in God, who we hope. That's where our hope resides, because we know He is in control. And from 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we live by faith, not by sight. Those two go hand in hand. I actually have a ring that I have that on. Because I needed that constant reminder at that time in my life. Not by sight, but by faith. Because I can't see I see what's going on, and it's not good. I have to put my hope and my faith in the one who sees the big picture.